This man gave the stewardess a note containing the same message. The only difference was the ransom amount. This man demanded $5,000 instead of $200,000. McCoy had also requested 4 parachutes and jumped from the rear staircase door. Everything seemed similar, but McCoy made a mistake. He needed to be more careful. He left written notes and fingerprints everywhere, which could endanger him. In general, the 2 operations were nearly identical, and it was clear that McCoy was imitating and lacked the intelligence to carry them out. Using the evidence left behind, the FBI arrested him in 2 days. McCoy was sentenced to 45 years in prison for the hijacking. There were claims that this was D.B. Cooper repeating the operation twice, but the results needed to be proven. The FBI disproved that this was D.B. Cooper because, despite their apparent similarity, they saw a significant fundamental difference between the 2 operations. McCoy's photo was shown to witnesses who had interacted with D.B. Cooper, and they said no, that wasn't him. Another thing that proves McCoy is not D.B. Cooper is that he is with his family in Utah celebrating Thanksgiving the day Cooper was hijacked. These facts prompted the FBI to remove McCoy from the suspect list. The second suspect, DeJuan Weber, confessed to himself and claimed to be D.B. Cooper. But when he died in 1995, 25 years after the incident, his wife, Jo Weber, stated that when DeJuan was dying, he asked her to come close to him and whispered, "I am Dan Cooper." When he told her about this, she suddenly remembered many pieces of evidence that proved his last words. She claimed he would sometimes talk while sleeping about leaving evidence on the plane as if he were afraid of something. She also claimed he had a knee problem, which he blamed on a jump. They also found some writings about D.B. Cooper on the edges of his books in his modest library. His wife also claimed he took her to Tina Bar, where the money bundles were discovered buried in the dunes. He had an old Northwest Airlines flight ticket, which owned the hijacked plane. DeJuan was a former soldier who served in the Second World War, where he gained experience using parachutes. Furthermore, he had a criminal record of robbery and forgery, for which he served a 6-year prison sentence. DeJuan's appearance was similar to Cooper's, so he was likely the wanted person, and even after his death, some FBI officers looked into this case, but no evidence was discovered. The third suspect, Kenneth Christensen, had a brother named Lyle Christensen. Lyle watched a documentary on D.B. Cooper in 2003, and then he became convinced that his deceased brother was D.B. Cooper. His brother died of cancer in 1994, and in his final breath, he told his brother Lyle that he had a secret before passing away without telling him. Lyle remembered Kenneth's words until he watched the documentary. Lyle's thesis rested on several facts. Kenneth previously worked for Northwest Airlines. He was familiar with the plane's schedules and other details, making such operations more accessible. He was also a smoker and preferred bourbon, just like D.B. Cooper. What if one of history's greatest hijackers disappeared without a trace? The mystery surrounding D.B. Cooper has puzzled investigators for decades. Did he survive? Or was he doomed after that daring jump? Let's look at the suspects and theories surrounding this unsolved case. He was the first person to hijack an airplane in American history. He jumped from a commercial plane with a parachute containing $200,000 and vanished without a trace. Whether dead or alive, the FBI has been perplexed by the mystery for nearly 4 decades. On Wednesday, November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a mysterious man named Dan Cooper went to the airport. He paid $20 for a flight ticket with Northwest Airlines to take him from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. In 1971, it was possible to purchase tickets on domestic flights without an ID card or other proof of identity, and to board an airplane carrying a gun or a bomb without any checks. It was similar to taking a bus, depending on the ticket booked. The man's name was Dan Cooper, but it was most likely a nickname. Later, he would go by another name, D.B. Cooper. This man was in his mid-40s, dressed in a black suit, long coat, white shirt, brown shoes, and black tie. He was carrying both a suitcase and a small paper bag. The man boarded the plane, took the back seat, lit a cigarette, and ordered his favorite drink, bourbon. The plane took off around 3 p.m. Everything was fine, and it was time for Cooper's next move. He called the nearest stewardess and gave her a small note. She assumed he was flirting and put it in her pocket without reading it. When Cooper noticed her ignoring the note, he approached her and whispered, "I prefer you read it." His insistent gaze persuaded her to read the note. "I have a bomb here and would like you to sit by me." He wanted her to get closer to him so he could show her the bomb and then make his demands. The stewardess sat beside him with fear. Cooper opened the suitcase to discover what appeared to be a bomb. He asked the stewardess to write down his demands and deliver them to the captain, which were as follows. First, $200,000 in a small backpack by 5 p.m. Second, a fuel truck. Third, he requested 4 parachutes. Cooper's demands revealed almost everything about his plan. At the time, $200,000 was equivalent to nearly $1 million a quarter. He planned to use the fuel truck to refuel the plane when it landed at the airport, allowing it to take off in another direction. And as for the 4 parachutes, he intended for them to jump from the plane. He requested 4 parachutes so that the FBI wouldn't mess with them. They assumed he would trick some flight attendants into jumping with him. The stewardess relayed Cooper's demands to the plane captain, who informed the airline company. The stewardess returned to Cooper, who was smoking and sipping his drink. This gave the impression that he was highly confident. She informed him that his demands had been forwarded to the plane captain and then to American authorities, and that the plane would only land once his needs were met. The stewardess claimed Cooper was utterly calm and relaxed as if he were a regular passenger. When the plane arrived in the desired direction, the pilot flew above Seattle Airport at a low speed while the FBI prepared Cooper's demands. The passengers had no idea what was going on in the plane, so the captain informed them that there was a minor problem at the airport and that the landing would be delayed for an unspecified period to avoid panic. The plane flew for nearly 3 hours above the airport before authorities allowed it to land. In the evening, Cooper insisted that the plane land in a remote area of the airport and that the windows remain closed to avoid being assassinated by the FBI. He was a bright guy. He took everything into account, even the most minor details. When the plane landed, Cooper's demands had been met. He received the ransom money and 4 parachutes, and the aircraft was refueled. He then released all of the passengers while keeping the plane crew. Cooper then instructed the pilot to take off for the second time to Mexico and fly at 10,000 feet with the landing gear down. The American authorities directed 2 military jets to pursue the plane. The planes were supposed to fly unnoticed, but because it was evening and raining, Cooper found it difficult to notice them. However, he was aware that he would most likely be pursued by planes. It was nearly 8 p.m. Cooper instructed the flight attendants to join the pilot in the cockpit and left him alone. After a while, the pilot received an alert that the plane's rear door had been opened. The aircraft was a Boeing 727 with a stairwell door that anyone could open during the flight. When the pilot noticed that the staircase had been opened and they were losing pressure, they assumed Cooper had jumped. The flight attendants returned to the passenger area and discovered the door open. Cooper had disappeared. The bomb, suitcase, and 2 parachutes were all left behind. Cooper jumped over a forest between Seattle and Reno, Nevada. What happened next to Cooper has been debated for nearly 50 years, dating back to 1971, but the only certainty is that he was never seen or heard from again. Even the 2 jets failed to notice him while jumping. As soon as the plane landed at the airport, the FBI scoured it for any clues that could lead to Cooper. Cooper's black tie was the only trace left on the plane. Nobody could say for sure why Cooper left his tie. This tie assisted them in locating Cooper via a simple DNA test, but such technology was not available then, so they set it aside and used it years later. They discovered something which we will discuss in the coming minutes. The FBI then conducted a large-scale investigation. The first thing they did was search for Cooper in the forest. They assumed Cooper would not survive the jump, but they discovered no evidence of his death or injury. He had just disappeared. The FBI drew a sketch based on the 2 flight attendants' statements. It is thought that their description was extremely accurate because they spent so many hours with him and were the only ones capable of doing so. Cooper was about 6.1 feet tall and weighed around 80 kilograms. He was in his mid-40s. He had brown eyes. His voice was hoarse and his speech slurred, but his use of words appeared intelligent. Some of you may believe that Cooper had an accomplice. The FBI ruled out this possibility because the pilot said he chose the flight path after taking off from Seattle Airport and heading for Mexico. Before handing Cooper the money, the FBI pre-recorded the serial numbers, and the $200,000 were made up of $20 bills, which meant that if Cooper tried to use it anywhere, the FBI would be completely aware. Almost a decade later, in 1980, a young boy was playing at the edge of a river when, while digging in the sand, he discovered 3 bundles of moldy money buried. They were all $20 bills, for a total of about $5,800. The money was taken and examined by the FBI, who determined that it matched the ransom money taken by Cooper. The young boy was 8 and camping with his father when he discovered the money. They were in an area known as Tina Bar, and the FBI was perplexed because the money was found outside Cooper's drop zone. Some people claimed Cooper buried the money. Others speculated that those bundles most likely traveled by river. As previously stated, this finding occurred in 1980, 9 years after the hijacking operation in 1971. So let's go back to what happened after the hijacking. Several pieces of evidence and suspects emerged over the following year, 1972. The majority of the evidence was misleading, which was due to the story's widespread distribution. Many people sent messages to the FBI claiming to be D.B. Cooper or knowing about him. During the first 5 years of the investigation, the number of suspects reached 800, but the list was eventually reduced to only 24 main suspects. Cooper was charged with hijacking, and according to American law, the statute of limitations expires after 5 years. So, 5 years later, a grand jury convened and charged Cooper with blackmail, an accusation that, under U.S. law, does not expire and remains open. If Cooper is arrested 50 years later, a warrant will be issued. Until now, the authorities have failed to apprehend him. This is the only unsolved hijacking case involving the FBI. Now let's look at the main suspects accused of being the faithful D.B. Cooper, but none were confirmed. Let's begin with the first suspect. His name was Richard Floyd McCoy, and he had a few things in common with D.B. Cooper. 4 months after Cooper's incident on April 7, 1972, McCoy hijacked a plane. He also selected the same plane model as Cooper, the Boeing 727. Furthermore, he purchased an expensive house after only a short time in the operation. Another vital evidence supporting Kenneth's accusation is that his picture was shown to one of the stewards on the plane with Cooper, and their striking resemblance took her aback. She claimed this picture resembled the others she had seen but couldn't confirm that the man was D.B. Cooper. The FBI eventually ruled Kenneth out because his height was shorter than Cooper's. Kenneth, as previously stated, was an ex-soldier with professional parachuting experience. Cooper also jumped from the plane by parachute, which could be conclusive evidence against Kenneth. However, the FBI became convinced that Kenneth was not D.B. Cooper since the latter used the worst parachute of the 4 to jump. And if Kenneth were indeed D.B. Cooper, he would have used one of the best parachutes. The fourth and final suspect, named Robert Rackstraw, is still alive. He was a helicopter pilot. He fought in the Vietnam War and received training in explosives and parachutes. He was fired from the Army shortly before the incident for lying and engaging in inappropriate behavior. He reasoned about carrying out such operations. He was unemployed and wanted to exact revenge. Even when journalists and authors asked him if he was D.B. Cooper would say, "Maybe, who knows?" He made provocative statements. He said he's one of the few who can solve this case in a documentary. The FBI eventually couldn't prove the accusation against him, so his file and investigation were officially closed in 2016. 4 suspects have been introduced thus far, and as I previously stated, there were many suspects, but these 4 were the closest. Let us move on to a thesis advanced by one of the FBI's highest-ranking officers, Larry Carr. The officer stated that D.B. Cooper did not make it when he jumped. The FBI initially believed Cooper was a professional paratrooper, but he chose the worst type of parachute they provided. He would not have jumped in such lousy weather as a professional. So the FBI came to believe Cooper was a lousy paratrooper. The problem with this thesis is that they found no trace of his body. How did he disappear without a trace, even though the FBI searched the drop zone? This thesis was supported by bundles of money discovered in a remote forest area. The river most likely carried them to the location where they were found. The question is why there was no trace of Cooper's money, except for those 3 bundles, which had never been used before and had never been found. The most likely explanation is that these 3 bundles were in the suitcase and happened to emerge at the river's edge while the briefcase continued to float. Cooper jumped into a large river that passed through the forest. Previously, we stated that Cooper selected the worst type of parachute. He chose the uncontrollable option. As soon as it opens, the wind determines your fate. Cooper most likely failed to take control of the parachute. He fell into the river and drowned, and the river drew him along with his suitcase and everything he owned. This would demonstrate that the FBI could not find any trace of Cooper, despite their extensive search and combing of the area. This river used to flow into a larger river, known as the Columbia River, which then flowed into the Pacific Ocean, implying that Cooper's body and everything he owned were most likely at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. This theory is the most accurate, as it explains everything that happened to Cooper. Do you remember Cooper's tie, which was left on the plane? After discovering the DNA, they examined it and discovered rare chemicals only used in Boeing factories, the manufacturer of the Cooper hijacked aircraft. This may indicate Cooper worked for Boeing, but it did not provide conclusive evidence proving D.B. Cooper's true identity. Finally, the FBI gave up hope and officially closed the case in 2016, leaving Cooper's disappearance as a puzzle and mystery.